to, instead of trying to pay doulas to put a Band-Aid on the system, instead coming to the childbirth educators, coming to the advocates like you and I and the doulas and saying, please come help train the folks who are in these fucking systems.
Welcome back to Found Free. I'm your host, Sabia Wade, where we talk about everything from spirituality to entrepreneurship to care to justice-oriented work and liberation. And I'm back with our host, could be co-host, our guest, Flora Cruz, also known as Badass Mother Birther. And this is part 2 of our conversation. And we're going to get into some more stuff. Because part 1 was good. But I specifically wanted to have a conversation about Medicaid reimbursement. So just to kind of give people a little bit of context, currently in the U.S., there are states, I think about 13 or 14 states now, that have Medicaid reimbursement for doula services. And we love that in the sense of we want to be able to give access to birthing people who are low income, because really to pay for a doula and actually pay us well would be a few $1,000s for the prenatal education, the research we do, being on call, showing up for a birth that we don't know how long we're going to be there for, postpartum care, the emotional space, the recovery. Like, it's a bunch that it would need to be paid for. So to be able to have Medicaid reimbursement in theory is great, because we also know that low-income people are the ones being most impacted by systems of oppression, right? Obstetric violence, so on and so forth. But there's also nuance to this conversation. And so I would love to start this conversation about Medicaid reimbursement and how you're feeling about it.
I think on the face of it, when you look at it from the outside, it sounds great. Like, it sounds like this is great, right? Like, doulas are getting paid. We're increasing access. We're potentially lowering the rates of violence and cesarean sections, and more access to like VBACs and all of these wonderful, beautiful things. On the face of it, it sounds wonderful and beautiful, right? But when you're really looking at it and the variables and the things that are involved, what's really happening is the system, instead of fixing itself, and I don't even like saying fixing, because the system is not even broken to begin with. It's was built that way, and it's fucking running the way that it's supposed to be ran. So it's not even broken to begin with. But instead of them doing the work of fixing their shit, it's like throwing the job off onto doulas. It's like a Band-Aid type situation, right? What comes with that is the increased risk of regulation of doulas. The reason why doulas have such great benefit to them is because we're not regulated. We don't have this overseeing body that is telling us what we can and can't do, what we can say, what we can't say, how we can advocate, if we can't advocate. Most doulas wouldn't even look at a client and say, hey, you can leave. You can sign out AMA right now and go home or go to another hospital. Do you think that those types of systems that are reimbursing doulas are going to want to reimburse doulas who could potentially suggest that to someone who's in labor? The regulation is coming. There has already been nursing boards that are being put in charge of doulas of regulating doulas. And the thing is that nurses don't really have good insight as to what a doula is and actually does. They're two completely different professions. But that's what comes with government money.
Nothing is free.
Nothing is free.
Nothing is free. And I've some of the conversation that I've had with doulas is like, really, even if we talk about like the literal amount of money, right, that's being reimbursed, like California, I think in totality right now it's like $2,000 something. Seattle is about to be at $3,000, $3,500, I think, which would be like the highest reimbursement rate. But there's people in places that are like $700, so on. It's like variances in different states. And I'm like, you know, like you said, like there's this kind of feeling of like the doula is the Band-Aid, right? Because there's been enough research, literal research, right, that says like what we do help with, which is a lot of things that, you know, the lessening the C-sections, the like decreasing postpartum mood disorders, being able to detect them faster, right? When you have a doula in your space, like there's all these benefits. But I always question, especially doulas who tend to undercharge and undervalue the work that they do.
Right.
Like if this big system is coming in, it's because we're providing something that has a lot of value, right? And know that we're not getting partially enough, even if we're talking about just that kind of part of it, right? Because we don't understand our value. We don't understand our value in the sense of monetarily when it comes into these systems. And like, why would they want to connect with us? Why would it? Cause before years, even when I started in 2015, it was like, we don't want doulas in a hospital. We don't want doulas here. We don't want doulas there. Like, and I'm sure before then it was even more resistance, right? Like, we don't want that. And now it's like, now we want to bring you into the fold, and you have to really question, like, it's not just about the being able to give low income folks access. There's other reasons for it that some of us can assume, right? But I just feel like it's so much deeper. And a part of that, I do believe, is leading to regulation.
Yeah.
Right? And we have to go back to grand midwives, right? When we're talking about grand midwives, which are usually Black, Indigenous, people of color, who were working in their communities, right? They didn't have regulation. They didn't have any of that. But then around 1950s, 1960s, I might be wrong on my dates right now, but there became this awareness of like, oh, there's these community midwives who are doing all this work and they're doing it outside of this system. And at that time, people of color weren't even really allowed to be in hospital systems like that. Like we weren't just like going and having babies there. We were having it at home. We were doing it with our community midwife. We were doing it in these spaces. But it became like, how can we commodify these bodies, right? How can we say, oh, y'all can come, but in order to commodify, we have to take away these grand midwives.
Yes.
We now have to include a certain level of schooling. Now we have to include a certain level of testing. We also know that some of you can't read what's in front of you. You can go deliver babies, no problem. But right? Like you going out doing magic for real, but we know that you can't read to this level. So we're going to put this test in front of you and say like, oh, well, you failed it, right? And it also was like even in the hospital systems when midwives, especially people of color, were starting to be like kind of work in that system, when there were deaths and things, they would blame it on the grand midwives.
Right.
When it wasn't them.
No.
It wasn't them. So now we see this like replication in sorts, right?
It's history repeating itself, essentially.
Wow. We realize that doulas are becoming more, especially because of COVID, right? COVID really brought doulas into the fold.
It really did.
In a way that like people were like, whoa, why are these doulas coming in, right?
And even home births.
Exactly. So it's like bringing, like now we see that people are looking for doulas because they're filling the spaces that, like you said, we weren't built to fill. But we want to be able to say, oh, you can get a doula. The doula can help with the education at home. The doula can do the continuum of care, continuity of care, right? The doula can help with postpartum. Doula can do all this other piece. They can help with the emotional piece, the this, the that, whatever. But with that now comes this like merging that we have to be really, 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 really cautious about, because like you said, there is a state where, I forgot what state it was, we were talking about this before, where they want the nursing board to direct the doulas. And we're like, that's, but then they also say we're so non-medical. Make sure that we maintain our non-medical thing. We're not medical people. So then why are we going under nurses who are medical?
Because the system needs to control things that it doesn't have control over. And as of now, they've never had control over doulas. And once they can gain that control, it's going to be the white man invented doulas. That's what it's going to be. All this is going to be a thing of the past, and y'all, we're going to be looked at like the crazy people who are dangerous and not knowledgeable and out here practicing, doing God knows what.
And it's already some of that, right? And like, and to be like very transparent, like there are doulas and there's also doula trainings, like no shade, no tea, but that do teach in a way that is harmful, right? They are teaching doulas to do things that I wouldn't feel comfortable doing myself, right? So, and there is like when we talk about advocacy, right? Like there's this kind of stigma that advocacy means that you're yelling and screaming at a doctor. When we talked about like it doesn't have to look like that, and most of the time it doesn't. And if I do have to turn up on you, know that it is something that is like it needed to be turned up on. You know what I mean?
Right,
but like, so now we're like, and I've heard this, like I've literally in conversation just heard people say, like in hospital spaces or whatever, like, well, doulas need to kind of have like a more regulation because we need to know what they do and what they don't do, because we had this one bad doula that now we have this idea that all the doulas are bad, and this is why exactly they need to have a regulation, they need to have a process, they need to be getting tested by the state, they need to have a license, they need to have an NPI number, they need to have all of this, but we need to be able to track them. And we need to be able to call them out, and we need to be able to, you know, dispel them.
Right.
And it's like...
And eventually the doula will become a useless part of the team. They will just be part of the big wheel. The doula won't be as effective as a doula who is sovereign and doing what they need to do. The doula will be useless at that point. The benefit will be only to the system. And that's where it's going to eventually lead, right? But when you put a dollar in front of somebody's face, they're almost always going to chase that dollar and not worry about who's the person that's handing over that dollar, right? So we need to be really careful of knowing that not all money is good money, because that's just fact.
It is. It is.
That's just fact. I'm worried about where we're gonna end up. And also the people that are going to come into doula work because of that reimbursement, people that don't belong in doula work.
And it's the same thing as nursing. Like I used to be a nursing assistant. So like we would have people that come into nursing because they care about people, right? And like they have this love for people. And you saw that in the way they showed up. And you will also have those nurses where you're like, oh, you're here because it's good money. Like you don't want to be here. You can care less about people.
Like, crying in their cars. Screaming into their pillows. Wishing they had never gone into nursing.
Yes, but it's just like the imagery of like you can come and make money. You can work anywhere in the world and you can do this and you can do that. And I feel like, you know, when we talk about doulas and like when we talk about money, like doulas in general have been very undervalued, very underpaid historically. Right. Especially in the times that we're in. And it's like, I just want to name that for the person that's like, well, I need that dollar, right? That's also part of it. Know that you need that dollar, right? You have to choose between surviving and not surviving. So you're gonna align with the same because you need to make the money, but the money is the only thing. The other benefits, like I always say in the Medicaid benefits that I've seen, that it doesn't actually support the workforce of doulas.
No, it doesn't. And like how we were talking about earlier, people are even struggling to get reimbursement. How is that fair in any way? At all? That doesn't sound good at all.
And a lot of it, like some of the, like, you know, when we talk about the reimbursement model, so doulas, and it's different for different states, because I actually just at a conference where I learned that they don't actually get reimbursed until they finish everything, until they finish the complete entire client situation. And you know that could be a year. If you start working with somebody at 15 weeks, 20 weeks, whatever the case may be, okay, you got a whole another 20 weeks to go. They may have their baby, especially their first time parent, you got a whole another month to go, damn near, because they're not gonna have a baby at 37 weeks or 40 weeks. You got another 2 weeks or so before they have their baby. And then you're doing postpartum visits. That can take 2 to 3, 4 months, depending on how many visits that are allocated for that time. And then you put in your invoice or whatever, and then you get paid. And that a lot of times, like, it's taking 1, 2, 3 months for people to receive a check, because in the Medicaid system where doctors kind of operate, they have that system, right? You take care of your client in April, you don't get paid until July. It's fine because there's money in the bank, because like this is your doctor is different, right? for doulas, it's like, how do I not have a check after 3 months? I have rent to pay.
Exactly. And meanwhile, you're having to come out of the pocket, right? Because you're having to pay for gas, parking,
Childcare,
food, childcare, essential oils, all your tools that you need. You're having to keep it all up to par, up to date. Like, there's expenses that come with that. You're having to pay for your website. Like, there's just so many expenses.
You're running a business.
You're running a business, essentially, right? So you're coming out the pocket in hopes that you're going to get paid a few months down the line. And it also doesn't speak to the fact that not everyone who is pregnant is going to actually have a live baby. I had a client that was pregnant. Everything was great. Got to 20-week appointment. Finds out baby has severe abnormalities that are not compatible with life. And lots of them, not just one. She had to make the tough decision of terminating the pregnancy at that time. So not everything's so black and white. The journey looks so different. And that was everybody.
And that was a part of even like when we were like, you know, my nonprofit was like in a pilot program, and we were like telling them like, you're trying to fit a square in a circle. Like we don't, even if you say, okay, you do a prenatal session, I'm like, we don't go for like 15 minutes and leave. Like we're like, we come in, we're like, how's everyone doing? Like, and we're also doing that assessment that you talked about. Like we're looking around, like, do you have enough food here? Do you need more care here? Is there additional services that you need? Like, what neighborhood are you living in right now? Like, where do you feel safe? Like, there's so many things that we do, whether we're talking about it verbally or just like processing, right? Whatever the environment is. And before we even get to the birth plan, before we even get to, right, we're like literally checking, how's your partnership? How's your family? Because we have that personal touch. It's not just about, let me come in, we're going to fill out this paper, and then we're going to do the birth plan, and then we're going to, no, I'm talking you through what are the options? What's your ideal situation? If we didn't do this, what are your fears? What is your trauma? How were you raised?
Absolutely.
Right? And that's not something that we can put into this model that's like, oh, go for an hour. I'm like, an hour? That's just an introduction.
Exactly. That's not how it works. But it just goes to show how much the system doesn't understand what a doula is and actually does. Right? Because in reality, people should be getting that type of care from their OBs and midwives, not just doulas. They should just right off the bat be getting that type of care from their obstetricians and midwives. Where we're talking about fixing things and making it better, putting the doula as the Band-Aid is not the ultimate fix. What this country needs to fucking do is to primarily have midwives at the top of normal, healthy, low-risk births. Why the fuck are we handing obstetricians to someone who doesn't need a surgeon at their birth? Why? This is the larger part of the problem, because other countries that are doing a hell of a lot better than us,
way better,
they're giving people midwives right off the bat and covering home births and doing all of the things, because that is what is healthier and best in most circumstances. Nobody gets an obstetrician unless the pregnancy or the labor is heading in another direction. Okay, but if you automatically treat a pregnancy as high risk, you're gonna fucking get high risk results.
That part.
Okay, it's just simple as that.
That part.
This country needs to do a complete fucking overhaul of the healthcare system and how patients are being treated during a normal part of their life. That's essentially what needs to happen, but it won't, because we live in a nation that is very capitalistic, and our healthcare system is money. It's money. That's all it is.
And essentially what you're talking about, right, which is so important, because I think people hear the word doula or whatever, birth worker, and they're like, oh, we just hate everyone. Right? They're like, we just hate everyone. We hate the OBs. We hate this. And we're like, no, we just want people in the right seats.
Yeah.
Right? Like if someone's coming into the space and they have a normal pregnancy with very low risk, there's nothing advanced happening here, put the midwife, that is the person that's in the right seat to work with them.
Yes.
And then guess what? When he gets more advanced and it's outside of their scope, give him to an obstetrician.
Right.
Because that's the right seat for them, because they have more advanced knowledge and they're going to be able to help with a more complicated situation. But to start someone off, right? You're starting someone off with a normal birth, or however we want to consider normal to be, And then you're putting them with someone who has been trained in surgical interventions, who have been trained in a certain way for a certain purpose. Like, I know I love my OBGYN, right? Like, I love her, but I am going there for, uterine this and hysterectomy that. I want these interventions. But to set that type of person up with that type of training and put them with a person that doesn't even need this kind of intervention, there's already going to be a cross and an understanding of what is needed here.
Absolutely.
Like, the start is going to be, unfortunately, of course, some OBs and some people have, like, they've done their own learning, right, to not be so intervention based, right? Like, you have OBs that operate like midwives, but we say that specifically. Like, we know that one OB that they operate like a midwife because there's a certain level of training and understanding that comes into that. And I feel like, talking about that, like, we have to kind of go into a little bit of the education that is being given to the people that care for us.
Yes. Can you imagine how much more effective it would be to, instead of trying to pay doulas to put a Band-Aid on the system, instead coming to the childbirth educators, coming to the advocates like you and I and the doulas and saying, please come help train the folks who are in these fucking systems. Do you know how much more effective that would actually be? Do you know how much less spending America would be doing?
Or invite us to the university.
Yes.
Like, make us a foundational piece of the conversation.
Into the system instead of slapping a Band-Aid on it. But they don't want to do that. There are lots of solutions here. Lots of them. Can you imagine how much less spending we would be doing as a nation? We spend how much on just maternity services? Billions that we are spending. Imagine.
And have terrible rates. Like, and terrible
numbers to boot. We have the most expensive healthcare here with the worst numbers, right? Like, we know that that's fact. Can you imagine how much less spending we would have and funding that we can allocate to different things if a birth cost $5,000-$10,000 versus 30, 40, 50 plus NICU time that might have cost another $100,000? That's real money. That's big money.
And then when it comes to, like, we were having this conversation when we first talked, when we first got here, it's like the conversation of, like, funding individual, like, businesses, birth work businesses, individual, whatever that is. And then also organizations who are in the community doing this work who have to, like, fight to get funding. Like, they have to fight, and you're like, oh my gosh, there's so much money. Like, if we started, like, doing the things that you're talking about, like, there'd be so much money available so that this community organization and this individual doula and this whatever will have the funding that they need to work with the low income people that can't pay and can't do this. But it will come from a place of abundance. Here's what we have allocated to you. Here's $100,000 for you. Here's $100,000 for you, because you're going to do this work regardless. Now you have the funding to go do it, to take care of yourself. Because as a doula, it's not just the navigating of the client. It's the massages that you need because your body is hurting. Right. It's the child care costs. It's the, like you said, taking care of ourselves. It's the therapy that you need. It's the, if you're doing spiritual practices, the time you need, the resource you need for that. Like, it's so much that goes into that doesn't get funded, which doesn't make doula work sustainable. But also, even the merging of these systems is also not making it sustainable because it's not realistic, and it's also pulling away from the essence of what a doula actually is.
Exactly. The doula is just going to end up being a puppet for the system. Essentially, that's what it's going to end up being. And that's what most programs that hospitals have, where we're like, we have doulas here that work on our staff. Okay. No thanks. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to pass on this one, right? But it's like the hospital is, again, trying to gain control of what type of doulas people have access to.
And there's different types. And would you like to give
Don't give me the ice chip lady, please.
You want to give your rundown of maybe some types of doulas? Like, when you say types of doulas, what you mean by that?
Types of doulas, like the ones who are just there doing a job on a Wednesday. Just back rows and ice chips. Then there's the type of doula who's coming in with their own set of biases and traumas and not really being supportive of the situation at hand or what the client actually wants, right? And then there's the doula who's coming in, who is doing the advocating, who is giving lots of information, who is part of the team essentially and helping to bridge that gap of communication and helping someone feel safe and secure and minimizing harm and doing all these great, wonderful things, right? I think that there's just so many different types of doulas, and when you're hiring one, you have to interview. You have to get to know at the birth, what is it that you do?
That part. And I told my doulas, I'm like, and even clients or whatever, I'm like, ask people like, what is their philosophy like around birth, right? Like, how do they see it? Do they see it as something that you have to be saved from because you're in pain and they need to jump in and need to save you? Do they understand that there is like a normalcy to what is being experienced? Are they someone who is like, oh, I'm really, really in good with these doctors and this thing, and I know these people, like, because you're gonna have to think about like, if they're so good with them, will they be able to advocate for you if they're trying to preserve a relationship?
Usually no. Usually no.
And what are some other things that you would say are like things that in that interview process clients need to kind of be to understand, like, is this a doula for you?
Is this a doula for you? I would really want to know if someone really understands physiological birth. I would definitely want to know if I was planning a VBAC, how many VBAC births have you supported? Do you have any type of extra training or knowledge in VBAC? Have you yourself maybe have had a VBAC? I would want to know.
And the VBAC is the vaginal birth after cesarean.
Yes. So I would, particularly if I was having a VBAC, which I've had too, would want to know, is the doula competent in that, right? I wouldn't want to hire a provider who is not competent in VBAC. I definitely am not going to hire a doula who's not competent in VBAC, right? Because that's more of a specialty now that we're heading into.
And one that you have to advocate for strongly, especially in certain systems, certain doctors, like you have to really stand firm as a doula, like, you know, helping your client move through that. Like, what is the research? Because you're going to get a lot of pushback around like doctors being like, no, that's not the right thing, or you need to get a C-section, and you have to really push back like, this is the research, this is a this is a that. Like, there's a lot of work to VBAC.
There is a lot of work, and it can be scary sometimes, right? Because there's lots of words that are used that are really scary. Rupture, death, you're losing your uterus. There's so many words that are thrown around that are really scary for a lot of people, and for some doulas, those words are really scary for them too. I've seen lots of doulas be scared of VBACs because that sounds really frightening for them too. So there's got to be a lot of knowledge of, well, what is the actual rupture rate and what is the rate of it actually being catastrophic, like to the point where somebody would die or lose their uterus, right? We're leading with less emotion
for sure
and more information
for sure.
And if you can't meet someone where they need you to be, you need to step out of that space.
And I think that even like when you're in that interview space, like as a client, and even in the reverse too, right? Because when we're in an interview space or consultation space, we're as a doula, I'm interviewing you. As a client, you're interviewing me, so we can see how our fit is, and like even ask some questions around, you know, what helps you to feel safer in a space that's full of tension. How do you ask them to doula, like in the past when there's been a space of tension or whatever? How did you react? Right? Because you're gonna have doulas that are like, I'm ready to go. And if that's not who you are, right, that's not going to make you feel comfortable. You're like, okay, maybe we're not going to be the right fit because you're, like you said, we have doulas who are coming from a traumatized space that when they have a reflection of what's happened to them, they're ready to react in the birth space that is not their own.
Exactly. Absolutely. And we want to know how resilient your doula is, right? Like, if I have a certain plan set out, but for some reason I end up not wanting to do that plan anymore and I want to abandon it completely and go another route, like, how would you react to that? How resilient is someone to that? Because if someone's planning a normal physiological birth, but then they get to a point where like, you know, fuck that. I think I want an epidural.
Yeah, I'm tired.
Is your doula going to be like, well...
Yeah, are they going to place judgment on you?
Exactly. Are they going to place judgment? Are they going to feel like, you know, they should maybe go home now or just call me later when you get to pushing? Like, what's going to be your role if the plan changes? Because what resiliency is there here? You know, for me, it's like, well, if that's what you choose, that's great. Then we'll
navigate
that, and we'll, you know, keep the lights low, and we'll have conversations, and I will be there to feed you and bring you water and flip you positions every 20 to 30 minutes and facilitate communication between you and your provider. I'll make sure that your partner's taking care of themselves, that they're eating, showering, and doing all the things. If you ever want to turn the epidural off down the road, I'm up for that too. Like, whatever makes you feel good. You want to give birth on your hands and knees with an epidural, we will help facilitate that.
Exactly.
Communicate that with your provider. Like, there has to be some resiliency there, right?
For sure.
Some nuance of like, okay,
how can we move?
But Doula can do all kinds of things.
Yeah, because like there's no promise. We can plan for the most perfect way that you want us to do the thing, but we also know that whatever's going to happen is going to happen. So have we even had in our prenatal conversation, have we had a conversation of if it was to go this way, right, what would be important to you?
Right.
Right. If we were to have an epidural, if we were to, even if we had to go to a C-section, that might be our last option. But if it went that way, what would be important to you?
Exactly.
Because I want to be able to help navigate that for you. Because it's not about, I think a lot of times in my experience, it's not that every C-section is traumatizing or that every experience that wasn't a vaginal birth is traumatizing. Right. It's more so what happened around me.
Exactly. Yes. When we look at the research definitely tells us that it's not necessarily the mode of delivery that is what is making people feel one way or another. It's how people are being treated throughout the whole process, right? That's what is the bigger problem at hand. Are people being respected? Are they giving choices? Are they being heard? Are they feeling safe? Are they being actually talked to and having back and forth reciprocal conversations, or are they being talked at and being told what to do? Those feelings are so much more important in how someone comes out on the other end. It's not just black and white of vaginal and C-section. There's so many things in the middle.
That part. And I would love to kind of switch it up, just to kind of give another kind of angle. Because we kind of went through kind of giving advice to like a client on like how would you kind of move through the doula, like picking your doula. But I would love to also hear, and you touched on this in part 1, is that doulas have to be doing their own work.
Yeah.
Right? Like we have to be navigating our own trauma. We have to like automatically, I don't care what kind of doula you are, you're always taking in secondary trauma. Yes. That's just the nature of the work. It is what it is. And we're just navigating through life as being people that we are generally the people that we would serve, we are. Right? Exactly. So when we're talking about disparities, we generally work with people that reflect the same disparities that we have, and like so it's not like we can separate ourselves from this work. And I think that makes it something that is different from other careers sometimes, so they can like clock out at 5 and be like, okay, I'm done. But like when we're looking at especially advocates, right, when we're talking about abortion access, when we're talking about reproductive justice, when we're talking about whatever, it's like I'm a part of that, right? What I'm advocating for also applies to me. And so it's like there is no separation in that way, which I think makes it even more like this layer of trauma or this layer of impact that can happen. So I would love for you to talk about, like, for you, what does it mean for us to be doing our own work?
It means definitely going to therapy. I think reaching out for help. It's not, I think where doulas are put in this position of feeling like because they are the person that helps, that they're not allowed to ask for help. And it's imperative that you do have your own village of people that you can reach out to and talk about a birth that you were just at, or bounce ideas off of, or to validate feelings that you're having. It's okay to cry. It's okay to scream. It's okay to be upset and to rage. Self-work is also filing complaints when you need to. Okay, because if you're experiencing things with certain providers in certain hospitals, helping to resolve that for myself is also writing a fucking letter and writing that fucking complaint and letting people know how people were made to feel and how the care was horrible, because just walking away doesn't feel good to me. Doesn't feel good to me either. Not overloading yourself with work. Very important. You have to have your own boundaries as a doula, whatever that is. If you need to take a break from attending hospital births that month, so be it.
And if you can't take 8 births a month, so be it.
So be it. And like, who the hell is taking on 8?
Listen,
girl,
when I was in my spring chicken
phase, when I was
phase,
doing like 3, I was like, this is more than plenty.
I went through my spring chicken phase where I was like, oh yeah, and then I was like, after I was like, I can't even handle this, right?
No.
And I tell doulas a lot, like, it's important that in your learning, as you learn, like, diversify the work that you do, because there's going to be times where you're going to need a break from birth.
Yes.
You're going to need a break from postpartum. You're going to need a break from certain elements.
Yes.
And you're going to need to be able to, whether it's childbirth education or whether it's whatever, because you're doing that consistently year after year, it's a lot.
It's a burnout, and you're not able to show up 100% for people. So it impacts the job that you are doing as well. So you do need to, it is a good idea to have multiple streams of income where you can say, you know what, I'm going to tap out from this for a minute and focus on this because I really need a break from that, right? But if that's if going to birth is the only stream of income that you have, it's going to be really hard. You're not going to be able to get away from it. And then you're going to be taking on all the clients that you shouldn't be taking on.
For sure.
And everyone's just going to get subpar care. And they're already getting that from their fucking providers.
For
they don't
sure.
need it from you either.
And also, like, I think it also, like, and a lot of doulas don't want to sometimes speak to this because it feels heavy and it feels yucky. But if you don't do that work that you're talking about, right, and whatever forms it look like, if it's therapy or your spiritual practice, you're having your garden, having people to bounce ideas off of, like all this work, taking a pause, whatever it looks like, you become resentful of this work.
Yes, absolutely. You do become resentful of this work. And then you start to turn into the OBs and the midwives that you don't like. And you start to understand them more. If you start to understand why these providers work the way that they do, because they're so burnt the fuck out, there's a problem
somewhere. Yeah,
there's a problem, and you can see it when you start to show up at births, and you're like, all right, it's taking a little too long. You know, like maybe you should get the damn epidural because I'm tired of doing hip squeezes the last 12 hours. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you can start to see your care start to shift in the same fashion of everybody else that works within that system, right? And also, use your fucking backup doulas. Use your backup doulas. That is what they are there for. You should have a own cap on yourself of like, okay, if I'm at a birth for
this
X
many hours,
it is time to tap somebody else in.
Exactly.
Okay? Because you cannot overload yourself like that.
And I think, like, even in that backup doula, like, one of the things that I believe can be one of the biggest, like, care for ourselves as birth workers is set up systems and structures. Because a lot of times I feel like people don't want to call in their backup doulas because they haven't set up a structure for what am I going to pay you for doing this?
Right.
How am I going to do this? Like, what is the structure? And, like, when we
there is no structure, and then they're scrambling.
And
all
then
stressed out.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, now I'm calling this person last minute, and then I don't know how much I'm going to give them because I didn't put that into my overhead of how much it may cost me, right? Because if you're including your backup doula in your pricing is going to go up a few $100s and you're telling your clients, hey, I want to be well during this process. I'm not a robot. I can't sit here for 4 days and just be up.
Exactly.
So I need to be able to bring somebody in here. And this is why this cost is the way that it is, right? And I've benefited a lot from explaining to people what this is and why this is, and they're like, "Oh, okay,
yeah, it makes sense." You know, a lot of just don't talk to their clients like the adults that they are, right? We're like infantile. We do this like infant thing with clients, just like OBs and midwives do sometimes, of like talking to someone like they're a baby. Like, no, this is a grown person who's having a baby.
Yes,
let's just
they're
talk
grown
to them like an adult. You know?
And they're grown. In fact, they've grown. If they haven't been grown, they're about to be grown.
And they
must well just have it.
They understand. They understand that it benefits them when you're showing up to your full capacity, and a lot of times that means having a backup doula, right? For me, when I was fully enthralled in doing the work and I was going to births constantly, I would bring my backup doula to at least one postpartum visit so my clients could get to see and talk to the person that could potentially show up to their birth. Because the one thing that I didn't want to do is throw a stranger into the mix, right? Because I wanted someone to continue to have that type of care, and to make sure that the doula that could potentially go to the birth practices in the same fashion that I do.
Exactly.
It has to be, because if I'm giving you a whole nother doula that works nothing like I do, I'm not going to do that to someone.
Yeah, and it's now creating an unsafe environment. Now you're losing trust in me. Now it's going to make you bind up even more in your body when you're trying to have a baby. And because this person does not relate to you, they don't have the same foundational understanding as you. I mean, and everyone has their own doula swag, right?
Yes.
But there's also a difference between like your own doula swag and being like, are we in alignment?
Exactly. Absolutely.
So when you're not in alignment, you gotta just name it. Like, you're cool, but you can't work with me. Like, my clients are not gonna receive you well.
Exactly. And it's okay to tell someone that, I think that it's respectable to know when you're not in the right lane at that time. But definitely having a good backup doula, and even just two, I would say even having two
for sure
is a good idea, because sometimes that first one, they might be at their own birth, or they might be sick, or a family emergency, or whatever. Like, having two is a good foot to stand on, to have that. And just, even if you just need a mental break, right? It's not necessarily for if the labor is really long or whatever the case. It's like, maybe you're just not feeling like you can show up 100% that day for whatever reason. The backup can come to the birth, and you got to let go of the guilt.
It's like you're reading my mind, because I was literally thinking in this moment that you were talking, I was like, I also want to like say that doulas, birth workers, we have to give ourselves the permission to expand. And I think a lot of times, like, there is this sometimes said and unsaid thing, right? That if you're a doula, you must be going to 1 million births, and you have to be, you have the, the doulas who are, in no shade to y'all, but who are like, I'm at my 200th birth for the year. And it's like, at what cost, though? Have you seen your kids? Are you well? Like, are you, like, what does this mean that you're at your 200th birth, right? And, like, or we have people, like, where, like, we, like, you and myself, like, there's been times where we've done a lot of heavy doula work, like births or whatever, and there's times where we're building systems, right? We're building things that support the work, that keep the work going, right? We're doing things that are going to further the mission, right? And, like, there's time for that one-on-one work, which is very much essential. Right. But there's also going to be different people and different phases of this work that are going to be the builders. They're going to be the on the ground. They're going to be the one who's talking to the people that have power over here. They're going to be the one bringing in the financial information over here. They're going to be the one doing this. And I think a lot of times, like, doulas feel a guilt. Like, well, if I'm not at a birth every day, then I'm not a doula.
No, it has nothing to do with that. I've been doing doula work before I even knew what the fuck it was. Before I even knew it had an actual name to it. There's no set regulation here to where, like, okay, well, now we can officially call you a doula. No, that's not how it works. You know what I mean? There's people who are doulas who don't even do it for money. They do it just within their family, their social circle, all of that stuff. It has nothing to do with that.
And if we want, like, this work to go beyond, like, Medicaid reimbursement, right? Like, if we wanted to, like, and when I say go beyond, I mean maintain its sovereignty.
Right.
Right? Like, we have to be having conversations in spaces, like, not just the people that we're comfortable talking to.
No.
Not just
the echo chambers.
Yeah, not the echo chambers. Not the people that's just going to be like, oh, yeah, I agree with that too, and everything's great. And da-da-da. Like, we have to be talking to those other people, right? Because I feel like the work that we're doing is liberation work.
Yes.
Right? And we're doing it not only for ourselves and our understanding of the people that we, like, really like and care about and love, but we're doing it for the people that don't know they're not free.
They don't know. They're not aware.
Like, even like when we're talking about your Instagram account that's reached so many people, even that has been a freeing, liberation focused project in my mind.
And oh my God, I get so many messages every day of just, like, how people are utilizing that platform, what it's done for them in their life, what it's done for their birth, their pregnancy journeys, all of the things. It's a part of a bigger picture. It's not just a photo.
It's never just a photo.
It's not just a video. It's so much more than that. I think doulas need to really take a grasp at what is it that we're doing here in the larger picture, and take their own fucking advice.
That's
all the advice that they give their clients, like, eat well, you sleep.
We're always like, you have to, one of the ones that I hear doulas always say, myself included, which is like a work in progress, right? They're like, you have to learn how to receive. Right? They're like, now that you're pregnant, you're going through this thing, you have to, like, be open to your partner and, like, tell them what you need and, right. Be open to receiving. And they are so anti-receiving anything.
All the advice that they just gave the client. It's like, you don't even take your own advice, ma'am.
And the thing is about that, too, is, like, it's so important to, like, be what you're telling your client that you want them to learn. How can they learn it if you're not embodying it?
You're not modeling it. And it's something that even I talk with my mentees about is like, a lot of you guys are showing up to births and not even showing your clients what consent looks like. So some of you are doing hip squeezes and doing all this touching without ever beforehand saying, do I have consent to touch you to do X, Y, and Z? But then you want them to model that behavior with their own providers. It starts with you asking for consent and talking to them about what you would like to do and what the choices and the options are right here.
You're not automatically a safe person because you're a doula.
You're not.
Right? Like, you still have to abide by the things that we want physicians or whoever to abide by. And, like, we have to hold ourselves. And I think, for me, that just speaks to integrity.
Right.
Like, you have to be operating in integrity. And we also, like, in the doula world, not that everyone does this, but, like, there's, like, such this, like, competitive nature. And it's like all of us have our own. We all have our own
There's
thing.
space for everybody.
Everybody pregnant.
Everybody's pregnant.
Everybody pregnant. They're moving through some type of experience. They're moving through whatever. Like, there's no need for that. Like, this work is liberation work. And it can't be that if we're so focused on, like, well, I don't want them to get the client. And we're taking
like, why
clients.
not? Because the chances are is if you refer someone out to somebody else because maybe that's not a good fit, that person is going to potentially bounce someone else back to you. And that's just how it is. It's a reciprocal type of relationship. It's not about losing a client or losing the money. It's about working ethically, like how we want everybody else to work. We're not, you know what I mean? Like, we got to do the same shit.
For sure. So on that note, what is next for a badass mother birther? What should we know? What should we be looking out for? What should we be spreading? Because you be doing a lot.
You know what? Right now, I'm so enjoying doing childbirth classes. I love it. It's all online, but it's live on Zoom. I love seeing everybody's faces, getting to interact with people, really teaching people about their choices, their birthrights, physiological birth, showing them things that they've never seen before. They get really, they love the parts where we're talking about how to move past pain or to move within the realm of pain, because that's also just inherently part of birth, right? Mentally, what does that look like in our brain? How do we change how we see pain in labor, and how to talk to our providers, and how the partners can step in and be a pillar in that birth and to help people out. What it looks like to advocate for yourself, what obstetrical violence looks like, what abuse looks like. We go over so much in class, and I love being able to hand over what I know over to somebody else. And
it has a ripple effect, right?
Yes.
Like, you say this one thing, they go tell their cousin, they go tell this person, and you know that your message that happened in that one class is also, like, now being spread.
Yes, and
over.
It feels really good, because I felt like when I was really just doing doula work, it was like one family at a time. Like, it felt so much slower paced. Like, not saying that it didn't matter for that family, it mattered to everything for that family, but it felt so much slower paced as opposed to talking to a group of people who are then going to step into these systems, and they're going to cause some type of change.
For sure.
Whether they know it or not. Something is going to happen.
And that's what I mean. Like, you're a builder. Like, that's why I see you as, like, a builder.
Like Bob the Builder?
Yeah. I mean, Floyd the Builder. But, like, but I feel like, you know, like, builders tend to be like, how do I make the most impact, right? Like, doing the thing that I can do within my capacity, right? Not something that's going to burn me out, but what's in my capacity that I can make the most impact. So I know that I'm starting here in this space, but then it's going to ripple effects over here, right? And that's, like, the essence and the beauty of being an educator, being a doula, bringing what you bring to the space. And then how do people reach you? Because I know they don't want to reach you. They're going to be like, where's she at?
The DMs is...
I mean, your DMs have to be...
You know what I mean? But, like, the best way to reach me is through my email at badassmotherbirther@gmail.com. I've also taken on some mentees, and they stay with me for around 5 months, which is kind of long, but I feel like even though 5 months is not enough,
for sure.
But I feel like that's also a way of me being able to have my hands out and reaching out a little bit further into the communities and helping people. So that's kind of what I have going on right now. But other than that, I'm fulfilled. I feel really fulfilled at this moment. And so if something's working, don't fuck it up. You know what I mean? I feel really fulfilled right now.
Is there anything else you want our folks to know?
I just want you to know that your body is your temple. Your body is very capable of so many things. Birth is not this magic, mysterious thing. It's just a bodily function. Even if you can't afford to go to like a childbirth class or anything, like fire up your Googler, man. Fire up your Googler. Look up stuff. Talk to people in your community. Find your village. Get your support system going.
And even if you find like online, especially with the use of like Instagram and TikTok, like if you find doulas, you know, like yourself, who you love their values, their philosophy, even just going through their Instagram, you'll learn things.
Yes.
Like there's so many free gems
so much
there.
Free stuff out there.
Just by like looking through, just find the person that works for you, that has that vibe, that has the trust, that has like the values, and sees birth the same way that you see birth, right? Be clear about that part, because that's going to change the information, right?
Absolutely.
But I think like it's so much out there. And, like, I'm glad to know you. I'm glad that you accepted my invitation.
I'm so happy you invited
I'm glad
me.
that you do the work that you do, because, yes, the imagery is, like, it's not just a picture.
No.
It's never just a picture. It's a story. And it's just, like, I mean, funny story. My partner, who was, like, when I first met her, she was like, I want to have a baby, like, whatever, right? And I was like, okay. And so then I started showing her birth videos. And she was like, that's what happens?
Yeah, because people usually see just the happy person holding a baby.
Yeah, and I was like, what do you think it's gonna be this big?
Show what happened the last 9 months.
Yeah, and she's
rewind
like,
that shit.
Now she's like, yeah, we can step back on that.
Let's step back. Exactly, because that's part of being, you know, responsible, like, over your life and over other humans, right? Because even before the baby's born, you're responsible for who they turn out to be as a person in the community.
Yes, and that's a great responsibility. But I want to thank you. I want to thank everyone who's tuned in. Again, this is the Found Free Podcast with your host, Sabia Wade, and our guest, Flora Cruz, Badass Mother Birther. Go follow her and go see some images. Go see some real shit. And we'll see you later.